Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. Not going to get started just yet. I just wanted to get the webinar started so that people could start logging in. And give everyone about a minute or two, and then we'll get started with the content. Okay, it looks like we've got a good number of people already logged in. Welcome to the Fairfax Cryobank Sperm Donor Screening and Testing webinar. The webinar is going to be recorded today, and it will be shared via link in an email with all of our registered participants. Let's get started. Okay. I am Michelle Ottey. I am the Laboratory Director and Director of Operations for Fairfax Cryobank. I am going to be presenting the content of today's webinar. I will be reviewing all of our goals and going through everything that we're going to talk about today on the next slide. But I do just want to acknowledge that we are going to be joined by Doreen and Nadine later for the Q&A session. They are two of our leaders in our client services department. They're fantastic. Nadine is going to moderate the Q&A, and Doreen and I are going to hopefully be able to answer all of your questions today. I always like to start a webinar by reviewing what our goals are today. So my goals for today are threefold, really four. The first is to provide a detailed overview of our specific donor screening process. I'm then going to review donor information that is available to all of you that you can then use to choose your donor. I'm going to talk about our specific Fairfax policies and procedures and exactly why I think that makes us the best choice for you. And then the fourth thing is to provide time at the very end to go through the questions and answers, which I think is probably the most important part today. I wanted to put up some definitions because we tend to use a lot of acronyms, and I want to make sure that we're all on the same page. You're going to see some content on the slides referring to DC, or donor conceived individual. You'll see ICI, which is intracervical insemination, IUI, which is intrauterine insemination, ART, or ART, which I'm sure you're more familiar with, which is assisted reproductive technique or technology, DD, which is directed donor, FDA, Food and Drug Administration, and then the ASRM, which is the American Society of Reproductive Medicine. So just some definitions to make sure that we're all on the same page. Some things that you should know. Using donor sperm, and this is obvious, involves a third party in the process of building your family. Now, in the United States, the FDA does in fact regulate the use of third-party gametes. We're going to be speaking specifically today about sperm, but they also do regulate oocyte or egg donation. The term that the FDA uses for a sperm bank sperm donor, regardless of what the sperm bank calls them, is an anonymous donor. Now, I do just want to throw in the caveat, we all know in today's day and age, there is no such thing as anonymous or anonymity really, and we no longer use that term internally, but the regulations that the FDA uses still define sperm bank donors as anonymous donors. When they're talking about a directed donation, that is a non-sexually intimate sperm source that's personally known to the recipient. And that's the directed donor program. And I'm just going to briefly talk about that because when we're talking about using a third-party gamete donor, specifically a sperm donor, there's really two safe options for you. The first is to use a donor from a sperm bank. Obviously, that's what we're here to talk about. But I do want to acknowledge that you may want to use a friend or someone you know. And if you're going to do that, we do also recommend working with a clinic or a cryobank to facilitate that process because it is regulated by the FDA. So just briefly, because this is not our main topic today, I just want to acknowledge directed donors because this is a really important option for some people. And all 6 of our locations, and let me just go through those. Obviously, we're in Fairfax, Virginia. We are in Austin and Houston, Texas. I'm here in Philadelphia, so we're in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. We also have a location in Pasadena in California, and then Roseville, Minnesota. And any of our 6 locations are able to facilitate the directed donor process. We can help you through that and make sure that everything is done as the FDA requires. And this might be an option for you if you're partnered and you want the child to be genetically related to both yourself and to your partner's family. And so maybe you would use your partner's brother or cousin or somebody in the family that you feel comfortable with, and then you have that genetic tie from both sides. Maybe you have a good friend that you want to use. Maybe you're just not comfortable with the idea of using a sperm donor because you don't want it to be an anonymous situation. And maybe, you know, it's a good option for you because you don't have to worry about the number of other people using the same donor. I do want to say that using a directed donor can be complicated in various ways legally, depending on the state in which you're being inseminated and having your child. It can affect both existing relationships or future relationships. And because of all of that, and because parentage laws are complicated and so individual to the specific state that you're in, we really do highly recommend that if you are going to pursue the directed donor route, that you're going to work with both a legal professional and a mental health professional. And there are experts in this field of family building in every state. Some states obviously have more options for you, but it is important to consider the legal part of this process because you want to have clear expectations for both your family and the donor. And we do the recommendation for the mental health professional because it is complicated building a family, and it's always good to work with somebody that has that expertise. Ultimately, I do want to acknowledge that most people end up using a donor from a sperm bank just because it's less complex. You don't have to worry about parentage contracts, things like that. But if directed donation is the route that you want to pursue, we are very happy to help you navigate that process. One of the things that I don't think is addressed often enough is the fact that sperm donation has evolved significantly from the beginning. And I'm not even going to talk about the very beginnings of the first, you know, recorded sperm donation back in the 1800s. I'm talking more from the 70s and 80s when it became more common. At first, it was really being used to serve male infertility, and there was a lot of anonymity, and it was sort of shrouded in secrecy. And as we all now know, there's nothing good comes from secrets, right? And so over time, as more families were being built with sperm donation, especially by single individuals or members of the LGBTQIA community, the ideas and ideals of family have shifted over time. And we're so happy that that has been the case because it has led to changes in this field of sperm donation. And it sort of moved less away from secrecy to choice. You know, I want to choose whether I want to use an anonymous or an ID donor. And then it sort of has shifted and grown and evolved even more. And there's a real push from the donor conceived community and recipients for identity release donors. And there are countless resources from mental health professionals, from donor conceived individuals that really advise that early disclosure about donor origins is the best and healthiest for people in that situation. And we have really sort of moved as a society to embracing the idea of our knowing our origins as part of our personality, as part of our personhood, of our story. And so because of that, the sperm bank, Fairfax in particular, we've evolved and changed to meet the needs of both you, the recipients, and your children that are going to result from using donor sperm. And you're going to see as I go through the next couple slides how we've stepped up to evolve and meet those needs. First, I do want to acknowledge, obviously, most sperm banks started with anonymous donors. We no longer call them anonymous. We now call them non-ID donors because they are individuals who agree to participate in the program, but have not agreed to the release of their identifying information. Now, later in the presentation, I will go through some detail. We do now have a process in place that allows previously non-ID donors to consent to the release of their identifying information upon request. That is not a blanket policy. It is specific to individual donors that complete the process. And I can go into that more later. Because of this sort of shift and this desire to understand one's origins, we have at Fairfax decided no longer to bring in new donors that are going to participate without consenting for release of their ID. So basically, starting last January of 2020, we are only now bringing in new donors that are agreeing to participate as an ID release or ID open donor. And what this means is that the donors are private until your child is 18. And then once the child reaches the age of 18 or older, at some point when they're ready, they are going to have the ability to request that contact information. And I don't want to go into too much detail about the process, but I do want to outline specifically, just briefly and specifically what we do. So when your child is 18 or older and they're ready for that information, they're going to contact us and they're going to complete a form with some basic information that is requesting the identifying information for their donor. And we're basically going to process that. We're going to confirm everything in our system. And then we are going to reach out to the donor and we're going to ask them specifically, do you have a preferred method of contact? Because that's going to be your child's best chance of getting in touch with them easily and smoothly. We're also going to take that opportunity to confirm the information that we have to make sure everything we're getting to your child is accurate. And then once we get that information, we're going to share it with your child and they're going to have the opportunity to reach out and contact their donor if they want to. Now, if for some reason the donor's not responsive within a week, let's say he's on vacation or he has a new email, didn't update it, something like that, we're just going to give your child everything we have. So it's not dependent on the donor in that moment. We're always going to release the information we have. We just like to be able to confirm it. The other thing I really want to acknowledge is that, there are 3 parties involved in this process of building the family using third-party donation. It's you, the recipient, and most of the time you're the egg provider. It's going to be the sperm donor, but then it's also going to be your child. And we want to consider the privacy of all 3 parties. And on our part, when we're talking about privacy, we mean respecting the boundaries that are put in place through the terms of use, through the fact that the donors have agreed to contact when the children are 18 or older. And that really on our part starts with our donor screening process. It starts with our education of our prospective donors. So let's get into that. Starting with donor recruitment. Obviously, we have to find these prospective applicants, and we do that through various recruiting methods. We use online, print, radio ads. We are constantly recruiting for new donor applicants. And just as an aside, some demographic information, though we're recruiting from ages 18 to 39, the majority of the active donors that are in our program are between the ages of 21 and 29. About 65% of them are. So very few guys are outside of that age range. And this has pretty much been steady for the last 5 years or so. About 20% of our active participants are married and or have their own children. So that's always nice. That's an immediate proven pregnancy right there. And I did mention we have our 6 locations, and at each of those locations, we're constantly recruiting and screening and processing donors. And so being in 6 different cities does allow us to recruit a bit more of a diverse donor pool, although not as diverse as we'd like. We're constantly working to increase the diversity, ethnic diversity of our donor pool. The screening process is not easy. It's actually really, really complex to get through, and less than 1% of our initial applicants actually make it through our entire screening process to become donors. It all starts with an initial online application and a medical application where we're collecting the self-reported information from the applicants. It goes on for sample screening and then a couple of other steps that I'm going to get into all the way through the infectious and genetic disease testing and screening. So only 1 out of every 200 guys gets into the program. It's not easy to be a sperm donor. It's a huge commitment. And I mentioned it all starts with the donor application. And so this is a application that they are going to complete online. It is reporting their medical history and that of 3 to 4 generations. So it's them, it's their parents' generation, so their parents and their aunts and uncles, and then it's their grandparents. And we say 4, up to 4 generations, because if the donors, and as you'll recall from the previous slide, about 20% of our guys end up already having their own children, that's a 4th generation that they're reporting on the health of their child. This initial application also includes some lifestyle questions, and those are indicators of semen quality. You know, if somebody has a terrible diet, they drink a lot, smoke a lot, their semen quality is going to be poor. More likely than not, they're not going to make it through the screening process. So we do tend to ask those questions so that it's not a surprise if we bring them in and look at their sample and it's terrible. At least we might have some indicators for why. During this screening process, we have our staff do a donor interview. During this interview, it's, you know, they're covering a lot of information. They're going to be reviewing the entire donor process, the whole program, all of the details, all of that. They're going to be reviewing in detail that medical application that the applicant had filled out. They're going to be verbally confirming information with the applicant at that time. And we really look at the donor interview as having 2 purposes. One is discussion and the other is education. And we take what we do very seriously and recognize how important it is to you, our recipients, and to your children that are going to result from this. And so we state very clearly to these applicants that signing up to be a part of the sperm donor program, making it through this process of screening and making sure you can get in the program, it is a significant commitment. It is one that will lead to children. You're coming in, you're leaving sperm samples, and children are going to result. We're very straightforward about that fact. We don't try and sort of cloak it. The reason we want to do this is because it is a significant commitment that they're making, and to highlight that their responsibility does not end when they stop actively leaving samples. Their responsibility really doesn't ever end. They have to provide donor annual updates, which I will go into in detail later in the presentation. They have to continue to have screening and testing done throughout the time that they are actively in the program. And their family's medical history is ultimately absolutely critical to you and your child. We are also discussing at that time with them their motive. You know, what is their motivation? Why are they doing this? And are they appropriately incentivized? Obviously, in the United States, we're able to compensate the donors, and we are reimbursing them for their time, their travel. And I'd like everyone to sort of take a minute to think about this. It's not just physically the time that they take traveling to the lab, producing a sample and leaving. It's also the time that they have to invest in having a healthy lifestyle, maintaining the abstinence hours to have a passable specimen. You know, it's a big commitment, providing all of the personality profile information, completing all of the testing and screening. So obviously there is a financial component that motivates some of the applicants. I do want to acknowledge, though, that many of our applicants have personal altruistic reasons for wanting to participate. I've heard time and time again from applicants and from donors, oh, you know, my best friends wanted to have a baby and they needed a sperm donor. So I thought, wow, like this person helped them. I want to be able to help somebody. Or they have an adopted sibling or a donor conceived sibling, something like that, where there's a personal connection. Or they just are healthy and maybe they don't want their own kids, but they figure I can help somebody else. So there is that component to it as well, which I think is important. And you can actually hear what their motivations are in the audio interviews that we provide. Along with that medical or donor interview during the screening process, the applicants are completing a standardized personality assessment inventory, which is a test that is going to identify psychological issues or conditions in the person completing the PAI. All of our PAI report booklets are scored and reviewed by a PhD level mental health professional who then generates a report for us. And any applicant whose scores indicate either a significant psychopathology, a diagnosis of some sort, or a mental illness, anyone who is clinically depressed, or that we would recommend for mental health treatment, that they would be excluded from the program at that time. And we have referred applicants to mental health professionals for their own health and wellness because of the results of these PAI assessments. So that is part of our screening process. And then, of course, importantly, the semen samples. Now, we're going to look at 3 to 4 semen samples over the course of 2 to 4 weeks. And we are looking for various things. We're looking for the ability of the sperm to survive that freeze-thaw process, because as you can imagine, it's not easy to be cryopreserved at minus 196 degrees Celsius and then be thawed and be happy and swimming. So only about 50% of the motile live cells that are frozen are actually going to survive that process, even though we do add a freeze media with a cryoprotectant. So we're looking for survivability. We're also looking for consistency in sample production to identify what the optimal number of abstinence hours are for that individual, and then to know that they have to come in with those abstinence hours in order to have a good passing specimen. So that's a lot. And at this point, we're about 3 weeks into the process. So that whole packet of information is going to be reviewed by the donor review committee, which consists of me, the lab director, our medical director, who is a board certified clinical pediatric geneticist, our labs manager, one of our genetic counselors, and then the director of client services. And we as a group are then looking at the medical application, notes from the in-person staff interview, all of that semen sample data. We have internal use only photos. We have the criminal background check, which I'm just mentioning now for the first time. We do a criminal background check on all of our applicants, the psychological evaluation. So we're looking at all of that to determine, is this person a good candidate for our program? Are they going to meet all of the requirements? And do they meet the needs of our recipients? There's a lot to it. So if the candidate looks good and we're ready to go, the next step is to move on to the screening and testing. Now, before we get into the detail, the meat of it, I wanted to just acknowledge there is a difference between screening and testing. When I'm talking about screening information, this is a collection of information. It's self-reported information. It is information obtained through the physical, through various screening questionnaires. All of that information is then used to draw conclusions, educated, informed conclusions about disease exposure, about lifestyle risks, about heritable conditions and diseases. So that's one way that we're gathering information and making a decision. And then testing is specifically qualitative or quantitative data that we're getting from serological testing. So blood draws, urine testing, urinalysis, things like that, from the physical exam, symptoms from, that could potentially be observed in a physical exam, and also from the genetic testing. And this information is then used to exclude anyone that's affected from participating in the program. So just something to keep in mind as we're going through the screening and testing process. Mentioned a comprehensive physical exam, and it is comprehensive. It is 6 pages of information that our contracted medical health providers are collecting during a very in-depth physical exam and questioning period. They are looking to identify the applicant's overall health. They're looking for indicators of disease or exposure to infectious disease. And they're also looking for specific FDA screening criteria. So that information is then reported back to us at the cryobank, and we put that together with a packet of results from infectious disease testing. Now, when you go onto our website, you can see the list of infectious disease tests that we do, and we are doing everything that the FDA requires and then some. So we're doing serological testing. What this means is we are doing blood draws on the donors, and we're sending the blood out to a contracted FDA certified lab that is running the infectious disease donor panel for us. And that's going to include antibody testing for all of the things listed here on the slide. Along with that, we're also doing what's called polymerase chain reaction or NAT nucleic acid testing. And this is, the difference here is that serological testing is looking for your body's response to exposure to an antigen. So if you've been exposed to hepatitis B, when I take a blood sample and we run an antibody serological test, we're going to see that your body has developed antibodies to hepatitis B. That is a serological test. A NAT test is actually looking for the antigen, the actual virus in your system. So we're looking for HIV, HTLV, HCV. We're looking for the presence of the actual antigen in your system with those results. I do want to acknowledge Fairfax does more than what's required. We have added a herpes simplex 1 and 2 NAT test, as well as the HPV, human papilloma virus strain 16 and 18 NAT testing to our screening protocols. HPV 16 and 18 are specifically known causative factors in cervical cancer, and we're doing that test directly on semen, as we are for the HSV 1 and 2, as we are for the cytomegalovirus or CMV, which leads me to the next slide, which is CMV. This is one of the areas where we get the most questions. So cytomegalovirus is incredibly common. This is a virus that anywhere from 50 to 75% of a population is going to be exposed to at some point in their life. Most of us are either going to get what seems like a common cold, or we may have no symptoms. But we are going to test antibody positive for CMV because we've been exposed to it. Our body has generated antibodies and has the memory cells for fighting the CMV virus. So that is going to be detectable. So being CMV antibody positive means that you've been exposed to the CMV virus. And like I said, 50 to 75% of us are going to be exposed depending on where you are, your location, population. Now, I don't want to get into too much detail. My background is science, so I like to explain things. If this is not interesting to you, if you don't, you can sort of phase out, zone out right now. But I do just want to present the information for those of you who are interested. As I said, once you're exposed to the CMV virus, what happens is the virus comes into your system. It is incorporated into your cells. Your body then elicits an immune response. And what happens is there are two kinds of antibodies that are produced. You have IgM and IgG antibodies. Now, if I've been exposed and I don't have the virus actively infecting me at this time, my IgG antibody is going to be detectable and positive. And these are proteins that bind to the virus, and it's going to prevent the virus from entering more cells and replicating and making you sick. So if you have another exposure, your body's going to fight it. So IgG antibodies persist, they're long-term. So for example, if you're vaccinated, you're developing an immune response, you're going to have memory cells, you're going to have other immune cells that are going to remember that. You're also going to have IgG antibodies to that virus specifically in your system, and that's a good thing. Now, if you are not exposed, if you haven't been exposed to CMV, and your first exposure is during pregnancy, that can be dangerous for the fetus. Most commonly what happens is a congenital deafness. Effects can be more severe. So it's never a good idea to have your first exposure to CMV active virus during pregnancy. Now, it's important to note that when you go on any cryobank's website, you're going to see that donors are noted as CMV positive or CMV negative. None of those donors are going to be producing sperm when they have an active infection. And the reason we can say that is that we're not just looking for that IgG antibody. We're doing a total antibody test. If that's positive, it reflexes, which means that it's going to do a secondary test to look for both IgG and IgM. If the donor is IgG positive and IgM negative, they're fine. They don't have an active infection. There's no risk to you or your fetus. If a donor is found to have IgM antibodies, that's not a good thing. That means that all of the samples or any samples that have been collected are going to be discarded, and he has potentially a positive infection at that time. IgM antibodies are the ones that are going to be the first to appear in an immune response. So they don't last long term like the IgG antibodies. So that's why we look for both. Now, on top of that, I mentioned that at Fairfax, we're also doing CMV NAT testing. So we take a tiny portion of that semen, we do an extraction, and we are looking specifically, well, it's not we, it's our molecular infectious disease lab, credit where credit's due. They are looking specifically for the CMV virus in the semen, as well as the serological testing. So it's doubly safe because we're doing twice the testing. So I do want to acknowledge the medical field is a little bit mixed on this. It's very important to talk to your medical provider about what their recommendation is. Some medical providers feel very strongly that if you are CMV negative, if you can find a CMV negative donor, go for him. Choose that CMV negative donor. Other physicians recognize it doesn't actually matter because they're not active they don't actively have a viral infection. So you're not actually exposing yourself or the fetus to the CMV virus. You're just exposing yourself to antibodies to the CMV virus, which is not dangerous. So I hope that is clear, and I hope that that answered the questions for those of you who had them for CMV. If not, I'm happy to pull back to these slides and we can address it during the Q&A. Okay. The other thing I want to talk a little bit about briefly is COVID, because unfortunately we are now in what is being called the fourth wave of the pandemic. And as many of you are aware, the Delta variant, which is incredibly infectious, is causing really high numbers of people, including vaccinated people, to become infected, and there are breakthrough infections. So I do want to acknowledge the COVID screening and testing that we are doing. We are following FDA and ASRM's screening recommendations. We have screening questionnaires that are completed at every visit by prospective donors, everybody. If they have any symptoms, we ask people not to come in. If they have symptoms or a known exposure, they are going to be deferred for a period of time. We are testing, so if somebody indicates that they have a suspected or a known exposure, we are testing them using RT-PCR technology. That's the diagnostic DNA testing. We're doing that on anyone, like I said, who has known or suspected exposure. We're also doing that if they haven't been into the lab within 2 weeks, just in case. And if somebody does come back as positive, we are requiring a deferral period. Any specimens from the 2 weeks prior to the positive test are being discarded, and we are not allowing them to return and donate until they had 2 negative tests so that they're no longer infectious. Now, we're doing this out of safety, mostly for staff, because at this point, the publications specifically from ASRM, Fertility and Sterility, and various other journals have all definitively shown that there is not a detrimental effect to the fetus. Specifically, it's not, I don't want to say that, strike that, sorry. It is not sexually transmissible. They haven't found evidence of COVID, the SARS-CoV-2, being transmitted sexually through semen. Being infected during pregnancy is obviously dangerous. Being infected does have a negative effect on specimen quality, but just the same effect that somebody would have if they had a flu or a cold and they had a fever, things like that. This virus is not specifically targeting sperm or the reproductive system, though it is found there. Genetic testing. This is fascinating and important, and I could probably talk for 2 hours just on this. If you are very interested in the genetic testing and expanded carrier screening, I'm going to refer you to a previous webinar that one of our wonderful genetic counselors, Suzanne Seitz, did. It has a ton of detail, and the Q&A on that is especially good. All of our donors will have a certain level of testing that includes a chromosome analysis or a karyotype, and that's physically, we're looking at the chromosomes themselves, looking at the shape and looking for things like translocations or deletions, things like that. All of our donors have some level of cystic fibrosis testing, hemoglobin electrophoresis, which is looking for things like beta thalassemia, sickle cell, things like that. Excuse me, and we've also, all of them will have spinal muscular atrophy. Now, the reason testing is different on different donors that are available in the catalog is that it differs based on what was available testing technology at the time and what panels were being completed at the time when the donor was donated. The expanded carrier screen is really important to talk about because it's screening for over 283 recessive disorders. And we've been doing this on all of our active donors since 2018. And it says around 60% of the donors are carriers for one or more, but realistically, the number could be as high as 75%. That said, every single one of us is a carrier for one or more recessive genetic mutations. And most of us are unaware because we're unaffected. And I just wanted to briefly go through this. On this slide, we have, this is from our website, we have an example of recessive inheritance. And this is the carrier sperm provider. Here is a carrier egg provider. Now, if both the sperm and egg are carriers of the same recessive mutation, there is a 1 in 4 chance that you'll have a totally unaffected offspring, not even a carrier. A 50% chance that your child is going to be a carrier for the same condition, but unaffected, because you need 2 copies of the same mutation to be affected, and you have a 1/4 chance of having an affected child. So basically, if you and the sperm donor are both carriers for the same disease, you have a 25% chance of having an affected child. So what our website allows you to do is choose donors that are not carriers for the same recessive conditions that you may be a carrier for. You can be carriers for different things, and it doesn't matter. So carrier status is important to know. So if the donor is a carrier, the best chance is to have the recipient be a non-carrier. And the results in that case are that 50% chance for each pregnancy that your child is going to be a carrier, not affected, or a 50% chance of not being a carrier, not affected. If the donor status is unknown, that you know that you're a carrier for a condition, it may be possible to request special testing. So for example, let's say you have a donor in mind, you know that you're a carrier for disease ABC, and this donor in particular wasn't tested for that. You can contact client services, and they're going to put you in touch with our genetic counselor. She'll talk you through, they'll talk you through basically how to choose the best donor for you and let you know if special testing is available for that donor for that specific gene. Now, if the donor is a carrier and your status is unknown, in this instance, you could be tested. You can work with a genetic counselor to review the risks. They'll provide a risk assessment for you and basically be able to pull out a statistical chance that, here's the chance of you being a carrier, and here's the chance that your child would be affected. And they can do all of that. But when it comes down to it, the most straightforward way to pursue this would be to then be tested yourself. If that's not an option, or if you don't want to do that, you can speak with a genetic counselor. Carrier status, as I said, this is an important thing that we're talking about. If you are untested, and we do have a handful of clients that are untested for these expanded carriers screens, and that has to do with various things. It could be because, for example, our international clients aren't often being tested using expanded carrier screens, and this is just based on the sort of standard of care that's available in various international locations. You can always speak to the medical provider to ask, could I use a carrier donor even though I'm not tested if I understand the residual risk? And that's an important thing that you may be able to do, and then have your medical provider sign off on that. So all of that information, it was a lot, I know. All of that is then going to be considered in the final acceptance of the donor. So we're considering the physical exam, the infectious disease testing results, the genetic disease screening results, all of that. And like I said, about 1 in 200 of the initial applicants makes it through the program to become a donor. So once they get sign off, this is when the guys can start coming in and leaving a sample each week. And while they're doing that, we're then starting to collect all of that profile information for you. These are not available in the catalog yet. We are going to collect educational verification. So either a copy of their diploma, their transcript, their degree, whatever they can provide to us, we're going to take. We collect a ton of personal information. If anyone's familiar with the personal profiles on our website, there's so much there about themselves and their family. We have childhood photos, we have adult photos. There are donor essays, which people love because the donors, it's their own words. They're answering these great essay questions. personality type tests, audio interviews. There's so much information that you all can then use that we're collecting through this process. Now, once we have all of this, the profile is built, and when the donor releases their first vials from quarantine, that's when they're going to be added to the catalog. So if somebody starts today, somebody has final approval today, it's not going to be for 6 or 7 months that they're actually going to be available on the catalog for you to see, because we don't want to put anybody up until they have available inventory. And as I mentioned in the beginning, we're FDA regulated, so FDA specifies that every vial has to be in quarantine for a period of 6 months before we can release it, and it has to have both pre and post acceptable testing. So as I said, around the 6.5, 7 month mark is when the donors are added to the catalog, and then we're going to continue to do blood draws to clear more inventory over time. So I want to address family limits and distribution limits. This is the next part of it. Once we start releasing the donor inventory and you all start purchasing, we then are going to start relying on all of you to report back your births and pregnancies to us, because that's the only way that we can really track the number of families for each of our donors. We made the decision years ago to stop distribution when we have 25 reported families. And the rationale behind that is sort of multiple factors were considered. We want to avoid adverse outcomes. And when you have larger groups of people related genetically, there's a greater statistical chance of adverse genetic outcomes. We are, as I said, we've moved along with this sort of societal shift in what individuals feel is comfortable and appropriate in terms of family sizes. There's a clear psychological impact to those who are donor conceived and their families when it comes to the sort of sibling relationships and the number of families conceived from one donor. There was a historical concern about consanguinity, which is sort of fancy word about half siblings pairing up. This isn't really a concern if people are practicing disclosure. And we really do distribute globally, not just in the United States. So we're also looking and watching regional birth numbers to limit that as well. As I said years ago, I believe it was 2008, we decided to stop distribution when we had 25 families reported. That said, we do follow all local regulations internationally. So the example I always use is that the HFEA in the UK limits sperm donors to 10 families. And so there will only be 10 families in the UK from one specific donor. When we have the 10 families reported, we will stop distribution there. So that's that. And then I just wanted to briefly talk about the vial prep types, because this is something that also comes up quite often. The easiest way to think about the prep types is think about the procedure that you're going to do, and then that's the prep type you're going to purchase. And bottom line, you can kind of use them all for each procedure, depending on availability. So if you're having an insemination with a medical provider, an IUI or intrauterine insemination, you can purchase an IUI prep vial. That means that it's pre-washed, the seminal fluid has been removed, and the sperm is just ready to go. Now, if your donor happens not to have IUI vials available, but you still want to have an IUI procedure, if the clinic can wash the sample to remove that seminal fluid, you can buy ICI vials. If you're doing a home insemination, you can purchase an ICI vial. That's an unwashed sample. That would be your sort of preferred for a home insemination, where the sample is just being placed on the cervix, and then the sperm are going to swim through on their own rather than being placed through using a catheter. That said, if your donor doesn't have ICI available, you can purchase an IUI vial. And then we also have ART preparation types, both IUI and ICI available, and we created these to have a lower cost alternative for those who are undergoing procedures like in vitro fertilization, or ICSI, which is intracytoplasmic sperm injection. And the reason we did that is it takes far fewer sperm to achieve fertilization in those assisted reproductive technology procedures than it does in an insemination. For insemination, it's recommended that you have 10 million total moles sperm, and that's what you get in a vial of IUI or ICI, so you're good to go. If your donor only has ART preparation available and you want to do a home InSem, I'd recommend 2 ART vials. If you're doing in an office, as long as your provider is willing to combine 2 vials, you can purchase 2 of the ART prep type for the in-office as well. This slide information, I'm pointing like you can see, but this slide's information is from an infographic that's present on our website, and you'll be able to click there to click through to see that. Once you've purchased your sample, you can rest assured that you're getting exactly what you asked for. It's safe. These donors are constantly being screened. They're completing eligibility questionnaires with every visit to the clinic. We're doing infectious and infectious disease testing at least every 90 days. Sometimes we're doing it every 30 days to clear inventory for you. And then, of course, we have the annual updates, and I'm going to go into detail about that here. So many years ago, about 10 years ago, we created a donor annual update program. And I'm actually really happy that we did this because if you think about it, the medical application, that profile that we're putting together that's free and downloadable to everyone online, it's a snapshot in time. The applicant is completing that at the beginning of their journey with the cryobank. It's their health history, their families. And obviously over time, that's going to change. We all develop conditions. We all end up, having issues at some point, health issues. So, we don't live forever. So that information is a snapshot in time, and we recognize the importance of collecting updated information from our donors. So each year we actually reach out to our retired donors and we ask them to log into a secure website, sign into their dashboard, complete an update, and then that information is updated on their summary profile. And I'm just going to pull this up. I want to pull this to turn this off, sorry. I want to pull up an example of a summary profile for you so that you can see the donors. Here's the summary profile. This is just an example for donor 4300. It's what it is. It's a summary of his profile. But if you scroll all the way to the bottom, this is where you're going to find updates. So he let us know in 2015 there were no changes. He let us know in 2016 that his maternal grandfather passed away at age 84 from heart attack, and that his paternal grandmother had passed away at 85 of pneumonia. In 2018, there were no updates. In 2019, 2020, 2021, there are no changes. So this is where you can look to see updated information on your donor. Again, that's under the summary profile, which is free to download and view for anyone. This is also an important point. So obviously, the non-ID donors are always going to remain non-ID on our website, but each time a non-ID donor gets the prompt to go into the annual update program, they are asked if they would like to consider consenting to the release of their identifying information upon request by an offspring. And if they indicate yes in that annual update, our profile editor is going to review that update, and they're going to see that, and they're going to send them a form that has to be completed and notarized, because this is a significant change. And basically, they are consenting to that information. When it's received from us, you would find that information under that summary profile if they agreed. I will say we've only had a handful of previously non-ID guys complete this process at this point, but anyone who contacts us, even if it's not during an annual update, this information is available on our website. So any previously non-ID donor can complete this, and we will then update the summary profile. And that way your child, even if you had, if they and you really wanted to be able to contact the donor, but the donor wasn't previously an ID donor, they would potentially be open to this contact. You would find that on the summary profile. So I hope that this has been insightful and helpful for you all. I hope that I presented clearly why I believe that Fairfax is the best choice for you when looking at us for a sperm bank and for your sperm donor. We are very mission driven. All of the staff that I work with in the production lab, the distribution lab, the client services, administration, legal, compliance, all of it, we're all incredibly invested in the work that we do. We all recognize and do not take for granted that the work we're doing today could lead to you having a child within a year. It's pretty, magical. And it's a beautiful thing that we get to participate in. So we are very mission driven. We are an industry leader. We have almost 40 years of experience doing this and providing the best tested, best quality donors for all of you. We do have very clear limits. We have clear distribution limits. We are transparent. We have evolved over time. We maintain ongoing donor contact through our update program, and we want that information to be communicated to you all through ongoing access. We have multiple resources available for you all in our Fairfax Family Forums, in the blog, and our updated resources center. So, I really stand behind the work that we're doing, and I hope that you all found this informative. This content has gone a little longer than we usually do, but I wanted to have a comprehensive resource for you all. So at this point, I just want to say thank you and offer this Donor Screen webinar promo code to you, which will give you full unlimited access through September 1st to browse the donor catalog and get all of that information. At this point, I'd like to invite Doreen and Nadine to join me, and we will get started with the Q&A.
Hello, we have a few questions here. We'll start. Do people have to answer questions about things like supportive of LGBTQ+ community, different racial and ethnic minorities, etc.? I want to make sure that the donor is not someone who would hate my child.
Oh, do the donors have to answer that? So there's not a specific written question. I think it's a really important question. The donors we talk about that. We talk about that in that donor interview, where we explain to them who's using the donor sperm, why somebody would need to use donor sperm. And I have not heard from any of my staff at any of my sites that there's been any sort of hesitation or negative response to that. That's a great question, but it is part of our our prospective donor education. And they know that we're queer friendly. It's everywhere on our website. They know it.
Great. Next question is about CMV. We have a few questions on CMV actually, so I'll get into those. If a female is CMV negative and uses CMV positive donor, if she doesn't get pregnant, is she CMV positive at this point?
No. And again, that is because you are not being exposed to CMV virus. You are being exposed to potentially to somebody else's antibodies, and that does not elicit the same response. So you're not gonna seroconvert. You're not gonna become CMV positive from that process.
Okay. This person says, I'm confused about CMV. If I'm negative, do I want a person who is negative? If I'm positive, which do I want? And either way, not all doctors think it actually matters because they're not active. It's just antibodies.
Correct. That's absolutely correct. So if you're CMV negative, we're always going to tell you, everyone in CS, and back me up on this, Dream, you're always going to tell them, talk to your medical provider. Go with your medical provider's recommendation. If they recommend, because you're CMV negative, that you should choose a CMV negative donor, that's what you should do. If you're CMV positive, it doesn't matter, choose either. And like I said, about 50% of the doctors are going to tell you it doesn't matter anyway.
And I just wanted to add that we have a really great tool on our donor search where you can limit to either just CMV negative or CMV positive, so that is something that limits the search when you're looking online for a donor. If that's something that you need to, that your licensed medical professional has recommended, that you narrow your results to.
Someone else asked, if I'm CMV negative and want to use my wife's eggs who are positive, will there be any complications?
So there shouldn't be. So if you're doing, so in that case, it would be what's called reciprocal IVF, where you would be the carrier for your wife's egg and the donor sperm. Again, her being CMV positive does not mean that she has an active infection, and actually the isolation of the egg being transferred as an embryo into you, you'll be fine. But for specific questions, definitely speak with your doctor who's going to facilitate that process, but it should be okay.
Mhm. Someone asks, are there any good studies on how active COVID, past COVID, or the vaccine affects sperm, eggs, fertility, or pregnancy?
Yeah, so there have been several articles published in peer-reviewed journals, and I would recommend really only following those and not sort of media press articles, because there's a lot of false information out there. There has not been any evidence in any peer-reviewed journal that COVID is sexually transmitted. And as I said, specifically in sperm, with the vaccination, you know, the vaccine is, as those of you on the call who have been vaccinated, you can have little to no response, or you can have like full-blown, I feel awful response. And if you do have a big response to the vaccine and you have a fever and cold and chills and all that stuff, like that's going to affect sperm quality negatively in the same way that getting the flu or having a cold or something like that is going to affect sperm, in that you're probably going to have a lower count. You're going to have a lot of immune cells in your semen. And well, not you, we don't have semen, but you know what I'm saying in this example. The donor would have a lot of immune cells in the semen, and for a couple weeks, the samples are going to look kind of crummy. So if that's the case, we would put them on a break and not collect long-term. The vaccinations are, I'm sure people have seen this, but they're mRNA vaccinations, and it's great technology. It's great. It's like magic, but real. Basically, that does not integrate into your genetics. It does not integrate into the genetics of the sperm. It does not integrate into the genetics of the egg. All it's doing is integrating itself into immune response cells, eliciting an immune response, and providing antibodies and memory cells. It is not affecting your genetics at all. So there is no negative effect on, the ability of sperm to fertilize. We're actually doing some internal studies long-term with our vaccinated donors, and there are a lot of other people studying this. The American Society of Reproductive Medicine is the gold standard for recommendations and guidelines in the field of reproductive medicine, and they stand behind the vaccinations 100%. I hope I answered your question and didn't just stand on my soapbox.
No, that's great. Thank you for that, Michelle. We have a few questions. I'll pick a few out. Someone asks, what happens if your IUI vial does not have the 10 million modal sperm post-wash? This has been an issue from other sperm donors I have used from other banks.
So our quality standard for our vials is actually post-thaw, not post-wash. So that's one factor into it. But we do have a complaint coordinator and team that if your specimen is below our quality standards, they're going to investigate to see what's going on. What we would do is collect your information and then send a form to your licensed medical professional who received the semen and did the testing on it, to find out exactly how they got that count, if they washed it, how they thawed it, if they followed our thaw instructions, all the information we need to make a full investigation to see if it's something that, yes, our sperm was below quality, or if it was something else, another factor that contributed to that. If you have any questions about your specific vial or your situation, call us at Client Services so that we can review all that with you and collect your information. If you have questions about what our quality standard is, it's on our terms of use letter, which is a form that everyone's required to sign before you purchase. So great information on there about that.
I do just want to add, I think it's important to talk about why that is the case. If you're purchasing an IUI vial, the clinic doesn't need to wash it. If your clinic is going to wash your vial, don't purchase an IUI vial. Purchase an ICI vial if it's available. And the reason you're always going to lose cells through a wash is, if you think about that process, what happens is a wash media is added to the cells, it's mixed up, and then they centrifuge it to pellet the cells, and then they're going to pull off all of that liquid, right? And in doing that, you lose cells. It's just part of the process. It is so difficult to get 100% recovery from a wash. It is not typical to get that. You're probably going to get about a 75% recovery. So if they're washing an already washed vial, you may drop to like 7.5 million to 6 million, something like that. If they're going to wash it, find that information out first, and potentially then don't purchase a pre-washed vial. Save yourself the money.
Okay, getting close here, but Doreen, this will be for you. Some donor profiles do not have an acknowledgement of genetic risk on their page. Does this mean there's no specific genetic risk detected in their screening?
So yes, it does mean that for the screening we've done on the donor, that there's no genetic risk from what we've tested. However, not all of our donors have received the expanded genetic panel testing. Only since January of 2018 have we been doing the screen that provides the 283 gene test. So there are some donors that have more limited testing, and that depends on when they were added to the program. So if you have questions about what your donor screened, I would recommend calling us or printing out that genetic testing and bringing it to your licensed medical professional, since they're going to know your history and your medical background. They're going to be the best to like review that. But we do also have our genetic counselor on staff for additional questions. But it depends on the donor and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm. And I think this will be our last one. Give me a minute.
We can do a few more minutes. I don't want to cut it off because I did go along with the content. If everyone's available, I'm happy to stay on for another 10 minutes or so to do more questions. Unless we don't have 10 minutes of questions, and then we could just end. One of the other things that I think comes up a lot is how much time ahead of when I need the sperm do I have to order it? Doreen, can you answer that?
Yeah.
So going through.
Yeah, absolutely. But it depends a little bit on when your insemination is. If you know when that is, I always say this involves a little bit of math. Because the tanks the specimens sent in can last for 7 days, or you can upgrade to a 2-week tank. We have 2-day shipping or overnight shipping, but our shipments only ship and arrive Monday through Friday. So if you're planning on having an insemination on a weekend, you're going to want to have it arrive on a Friday or before that. The 2-week tank upgrade is only a $50 upgrade. So sometimes that's a really great investment to make sure that you don't miss your window if you're not sure exactly when you need it. But it depends on all those factors to get where exactly you need it to be. And if you have questions or if you want to make sure that you can still ship it out, call client services. We're going to try to do our best to help you. Our cutoff for shipping out the same day to have it ship out, like for example, today would be right now at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So you would want to make sure you call before then to make sure we can ship out for you.
Nadine, do you have another?
Yes. Do you all have a sibling registry where my child can reach out to other half siblings from the same donor if they wish?
Doreen, do you want to take it or do you want me to?
Sure. So we do have family forums that are on our website. Those are for clients. Well, there's general forums on there. Anybody can register and interact with other clients, but there are specific donor private groups that are for anyone who has a reported birth or pregnancy so that they can interact with other clients who have. It's a great way to connect families who've used the same donor. But there's also, general forums where people can ask questions about their experience with Fairfax and other questions that they may have to connect. We also have social media, Facebook and Instagram. So you can also connect with other people. I've seen posts on there as well. But the family forums is probably the best way to connect with other clients.
And that's really easy to navigate on our website. Just go to resources, and on the little drop down, you're going to see Fairfax Family Forums. It'll take you right there. It's such a great platform, and like Doreen said, there have been some really meaningful connections made.
Okay. Next question. Does the donor relinquish all parental rights? While I understand offspring can reach out to the donor when they turn 18, I just wonder in regards to legalities.
Absolutely, great question. So when the prospective donor is going through that screening process, we educate them about the legality of this, right? About relinquishing the parental rights. And that's actually taken care of in our donor agreement. And each donor has to sign that the day that they have their initial blood draw and physical. And in that, they're acknowledging the relinquishing parental rights. And then they do get a copy of that. So yes, legally, they are not in any way linked as a parent to your child. It's a very good, important question.
Okay. Are donors aware when there is a pregnancy?
They're not actively, like we don't tell them, oh, we've had a reported pregnancy. I will say a lot of our guys are curious and do contact us and ask and say, like, do we have any families yet? You know, like, how's it going? And we'll let them know at that time, but we don't ever sort of proactively share that information. And also, just in case you're wondering, because I did talk a little bit about privacy, we do not disclose locations, names, ages, dates, nothing like that. We give them, you know, ranges of families.
The only thing we will disclose is your donor has between 1 and 5 or between 5 and 10, that kind of range. Like, and we'll say pregnancies or births, since not all clients report both, they might just report one or the other. We know after you have a baby, your life gets super busy. So sometimes those reports roll in a year or so after the inseminations happened.
Yeah. That said, on your end, please do report as soon as possible.
Yes. Yes, if you can.
Yeah, as soon as possible. But in terms of us letting the donors know, we don't release any specific information, but we would tell them if they asked.
Mm-hmm. We have some questions here about vials selling out. So a lot of questions are similar to this one. If a donor's vials run out, how likely is it that more will be available? And what is the timeline for that? Do you recommend buying more than one vial at a time?
So yes, we actually just implemented a donor notification system. It's still kind of rolling out for clients to be notified once additional vials become available. That being said, not all the time is your donor going to be consistently active. You can check the what I call the status of the donor's availability by calling client services or emailing us to determine kind of what's going on with your donor. But it can be up to a 6-month wait for the quarantine period, which Michelle can explain more about once we're waiting for vials to become available. But that notification system is great. As soon as we have vials available for a donor that you're interested in, if you're signed up, you're going to get an email saying that there are vials available and you're able to purchase those.
Yeah, we do try to do, as I mentioned, we're trying to do more frequent blood draws to clear vials from inventory. It's hard though, because if you think about it, every vial has to be in quarantine for 6 months. So let's say the donor takes a break over the summer and he goes home, you know, let's say he's a grad student and he goes away for 3 months in the summer. That's 3 months, and then he comes back and we do testing and everything. But then there's this gap of 3 months where we don't have any inventory to release for him. Or over a holiday or something like that. And so we are releasing as much as we can, but there's always going to be a delay. There's never a guarantee. If a donor has inventory today and doesn't have it tomorrow, there is never a guarantee that he will definitely have more inventory. That said, if there's inventory that will clear, you will be notified. We will release it on the website. You know, we are trying to stay on top of that. Demand is very high right now, and we recognize that we are having a lot of donors on wait lists, like with selling out. But we are doing our very best to increase our donors, increase production, and increase what's available. And just the other part, I agree with Doreen. Buy it, whatever you have the means to buy. If it's available, buy it. And if you don't need it all, you can. If you store it with us, you can always do a sell back later. Because if you want to have more than one child, you definitely need more than one vial, as long as you're not doing ART, like IVF or anything. If you're doing inseminations, I would recommend buying as many vials as you can afford to purchase at the time. And then there are specials, right? Like if you purchase X number of vials, you get storage free.
Right now we've been doing, if you if you right now we have 3 months of free storage, but we
Okay.
have if you buy 6 vials or more, it's 1 year free storage. If you buy 8 vials or more, it's 2 years of free storage,
That's great.
which are great. Fantastic. We
Yeah.
also have called Fairfax, which is a great package where if you purchase 5 vials, you get a 6th vial for free. So you get $1,000 or so off depending on your donor. And that's really great to utilize if you're trying to purchase multiple vials. And if it's something that's if you need financing, we do work with a third party financing company, which you can find on our website. But we do have options for you for sure.
About 1 or 2 more questions, and then we'll wrap things up.
Okay. I actually have 2 more questions here, then we'll finish up. If the donation was provided before you started asking all donors to be open to potential contact from a child when they reach 18, I'm assuming they will remain anonymous unless they change their status with you in the yearly update?
Yeah, so their brand is always going to remain non-ID. We're not going to change their brand code. You would look under the summary profile if they've been willing to change, and not change, but if they're willing to release their identifying information, we will update it in the summary profile. And as I said, it doesn't only have to be during the annual update. We'll ask them during the annual update every year, but they can log on at any time and request that change.
Okay, and last question. If I'm planning on doing IVF, what type of sperm should I order?
Yeah, if you're definitely doing IVF, if there are ART vials available, you can go ahead and purchase those. Those are going to have around 7 million total motile cells, which is more than enough for IVF. You can talk to your medical provider. They still may want you to get an ICI or an IUI vial. I would go with their recommendation. But really for IVF, you can purchase any prep type.
I would say in my experience, your physician is your best tool, because I've had someone say, my physician wants me to purchase this type, and then the next person, same procedure, I need to purchase this. It's entirely something that they are going to be specific about.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to give you our best advice, but always say, make sure you're checking with your physician or your licensed medical professional, because they know what they want.
All right, Nadine, thank you for coordinating and facilitating. Doreen, thank you so much for answering and providing your expertise. And to all of the attendees today, thank you so much for listening and learning all about Fairfax Cryobank. Really appreciate you taking the time to get to know us. Thank you and have a great day.
Bye-bye.